Some years ago, I'm going to just share my screen. Now let's get to that point. Where's that? Just one second. There we go. Hopefully everybody can now see my screen. Some years ago, I took a look at the archives at the US Lighthouse Society, and over 35 years of tours all over the world and all over the United States, everywhere on the East Coast, South Coast, West Coast, the Great Lakes. But I noticed there was something missing. There had never been a tour to Alaska. And started making a few inquiries, and it was perceived to be too difficult. There are no great numbers of lighthouses up there, but the sheer logistics looked very tough. And but that's a little bit like a red rag to a bull to me, and I decided we're going to figure this out somehow. I'm going to start with a map here. Let me just enlarge something. The tour basically was going to start in Ketchikan, and well, the main tour was Ketchikan and Juneau, this whole section here. And there are 2 lighthouses in the Cordova area, so we added those as an optional extra. But the main bulk of the tour is in the Ketchikan, Juneau area. But to give you some idea of scale, the distance between Cordova and Ketchikan, as the crow flies, is just 630 miles. But we didn't go as the crow flies. We went out to lighthouses here, up into Haines, down to the Canadian border. This is a lighthouse tour that took almost 1,000 miles. The journey starts in the Ketchikan area. I numbered them 1, 2, 3, but one of the things that we did was keep an eye on the weather, and in our first days in Ketchikan, the weather looked to be better on days 1, 2, and 1, the first and second day versus the third. So we reversed it because this journey out here required float planes going over the Prince of Wales Island. And Alaska, you have this low cloud a lot, and the lowest point crossing this island was at about 1,000 feet. If we couldn't get over Prince of Wales Island, it was a very long journey to fly up and around the Prince of Wales Island. So the other side of this is we're in Ketchikan, we are very near the Canadian border. The Canadian border, the north side of this fjord here is the United States, the south side is Canada. Our extreme point here where we came down to Tree Point is only 6 miles from the Canadian border. And many years ago, this was quite a rough area in that I'm sorry, I've been interrupted. Many years ago, the US and Canada had different dates for finishing Prohibition. Prohibition in Canada ended in the 1920s. Prohibition in the United States ended in 1933. This was a major area of running alcohol from Canada into US territories, and that becomes part of the story a little later on. Let's start our journey in Ketchikan. Ketchikan, really quite an old Alaskan city. This is what they call Creekside, the old area, formerly the Red Light District, the only really pretty area of town at this point in time. But I've gone once before to Alaska on a cruise ship, and we rush in, grab a charter flight to Misty Fjords, jump back on the cruise ship and leave. And we never really got a chance to meet and know the people of Ketchikan. This is an amazing place, huge welcome in that this is a welcome at the Cape Fox Hotel. But we arrived and there was a cable car arrangement to get you up the hill from the hotel, from the town to the hotel, which was broken. And no sooner had I gone into town and started making arrangements for meals and restaurants, the people would loan me cars. And in fact, that car, they loaned us a van later on when we needed to get everybody back up from dinner. But let's get on to the tour itself. And this is what I call the taxis. And the first trip was out to Cape Decision. And to put it in perspective, the only chance I had for this tour was to go in May prior to the arrival of bunches of cruise ships. You can already see one in the harbor back there. Ketchikan has a total of 9 float planes available for charter. With a group of 30, they're only very small planes, often holding only 4 or 5 people. I needed 6 of those planes to get everybody out to our first lighthouse, which is Cape Decision. So one of the pieces of advice we were given very early on is to come early. I was a little nervous about the potential for the weather. In reality, this trip, the weather, with the exception of one day, is absolutely exceptional. The only day being the 3rd day in Ketchikan. In each of the main locations, Ketchikan, Juneau, and Cordova, I had put in a free day into the schedule, in that I'd hated the thought of us getting to Juneau or Cordova and finding the cloud was so low and pouring that we couldn't charter the planes. So in each instance, we had a free day. And the only time the weather went bad, the whole trip, was on that one day. But let's get out to Cape Decision. This is an amazing spot, way out on the coast, very remote. It's one of the later lighthouses. It was built in 1932, obviously very active today, and automated in 1974. Most of pretty well all of the lighthouses in Alaska are serviced by helicopter. It looks like they could possibly bring a ship in here with some supplies. I'd hate to try and do that, but everything is by helicopter, and our views were predominantly from the planes or from the boat. Back into town. But then on the way back, we went past Guard Island. Now, Guard Island is a smaller lighthouse, which we were going to see from the boat a little later on. But it was only as I was putting this presentation together, I started enlarging this picture and realized all these white spots around the top here are bald eagles. And if I look around and count the number of bald eagles sitting around that lighthouse, there are in my photograph here, there are actually 15 bald eagles sitting around Guard Island. The other challenge with Guard Island, I do not understand why they allow all these trees to grow around, and that when we viewed the lighthouse from the water, I could just get a small view through this gap. But I've never in my life before seen a lighthouse surrounded by so many trees. But in the fun of doing a presentation like this, it made me look in more detail at my pictures, and I had not noticed all these bald eagles sitting there before. Back to town, and we board our boat to take us down to the Canadian border. I like to call this, I think I see a lighthouse. It's as we were heading down. Now, the vessels that we could charter to get to the lighthouses were pretty big, in that the whole industry in that part of the world is geared to cruise ships coming in and hundreds of people getting off and wanting to go and see various things. So here, there's 30 of us aboard. I think this ship could have held 150. Lots of room, but they looked after us very, very well. They good food, and the weather held up, which was delightful. Now, as we head south, first we come to Mary Island. Now, this is one of those, Jeremy referred originally to the original construction. This was originally built in 1903, but by 1937 was a total wreck. It was demolished, and the current concrete structure was built and automated in 1969. There is that the fourth-order lens from this lighthouse is actually in Juneau. Keep going further south, and we come to Tree Point. Tree Point is the one that's right on the Canadian border, 6 miles north of the Canadian border, and really quite remote. But and to give you some idea, we noticed that the front door is missing. If people were able to land there, I'm sure some vandalism or something, but you could have gone into that light and accessed there. It was completely wide open, which was very interesting. From this point, we had this extra free day. We weren't weather bound, so everybody wanted to go off and do their different things. And one of my stops at a restaurant, I'd gone to the employees, to the management office where there were a number of employees at their desks. And on the employee notice board was a big poster that said, "Play like a tourist for a day." And what it was in the week preceding the arrival of the majority of the cruise ships, residents of Ketchikan could take advantage of all the tours and the flights and the lumberjack shows for half price. And I said, well, can we not play like a tourist for a day? And they were happily allowed any of us to buy on our free day tours and trips at half the regular price, which I thought was amazing. The only slight downside was that those who had booked flights to Misty Fjords the following afternoon, that was the one day, but the weather closed in. I took the trip to, I've got to think the name of the island for a minute. Fun? Annette Island. But just south of Ketchikan, there is this large island, Annette Island, which is approximately 11 miles by 11 miles. And going back to the late 1800s, both the Canadian and the American governments were forcing Indian bands to settle, to find lands, and in particularly it's the Tlingit and the Yupik in this area were all given established lands. But amongst these Indian groups, there were nomadic Indian groups, and one of them is the Tsimshian. And the Tsimshian were predominantly from northern British Columbia, although they did come fishing into the southern part of Alaska. And a missionary, an Anglican missionary, William Duncan, took up their cause. He argued with both the Americans and the Canadians to get these folks a reservation, to get them land, and everybody turned him down. So he took it on himself to travel all the way to Washington, D.C., and managed to get an audience with President Cleveland. President Cleveland agreed that there was a problem, and he gave them Annette Island. And it is the closest thing to a sovereign nation within the United States, in that the people of the Tsimshian people have refused to sign any subsequent treaties or modifications to that gift. They're just delightful people, and they put on a very good show. It was, I think, probably half a dozen of us were on that trip. But no sooner that was that the next morning, and it's time to get from Ketchikan north to Juneau. And we chose to do this on the Alaska ferries, in that halfway between Juneau and Ketchikan, there is one magical lighthouse that got 5 fingers. And I had tried every which way to charter a boat and to get us there. And I thought I had it actually fixed. And I'd found there's a town between the two main cities, Petersburg. And I'd found somebody with high-speed boats who could get us to 5 fingers. What I hadn't figured on is there's no hotel big enough in Petersburg to accommodate a group of 30 people. So that plan didn't work. And so that left our only chance of getting to 5 fingers was to use the Alaska ferry service, which would go right by 5 fingers. That's the good news. The bad news, was if I looked at the schedule and the sailing times, it looked like we would get there at about 9 o'clock at night. Fortunately, we're in summer northern lights, and we should just about still be light. But I was worried about that. And the other thing I was worried about was that these are not cruise ships. These are working vessels. They go from port to port to port, and in each place they stop, it's maybe 30 minutes. And we were scheduled. We caught this boat in the middle of the day, and was scheduled to get to Juneau at 2:30 in the morning. And I worried that I would manage to get everybody out of bed, dressed, and out and off that boat within the 30 minutes. But I shouldn't have worried about it. Everybody did just fine. The journey north was absolutely spectacular in that we didn't follow all the wider waters. They would take us through narrow islands. It was almost riding down a river at one point. And with the recent snows, the storms that had come just before we arrived, it was just one of the most beautiful rides you could ever take. But here we are. The sun is going down, and the lighthouse I want us to get to is way around the corner of this picture. So that's when I had to call on the feminine charms, and I got Janet and Darlene and all the ladies to go and talk to the skipper to see if he could push it a little bit, because I didn't want to get round to Eldred Lighthouse and find that the sun had gone down. We really were hoping to, I'm sorry, not Eldred, Five Fingers. I didn't want to get to Five Fingers and find that it was all we could get was the light. But we kept going, and then boom, we made it. It's the most amazing place, and this is one of the lighthouses that's benefited from the trusts that have been set up. In that this area is very much part of a summer whaling program. The trust has really stepped up and looked after the building, and I can't claim credit for this photograph. This and any other photographs that I have of Five Fingers are copies of Darlene's, in that we're all so excited and dancing around. My pictures are hopeless. And then no sooner than we were getting decent pictures, the boat's moving pretty fast, and then the whales arrive. I'm afraid I don't have decent pictures of whales and lighthouses, and it was just one of the most exciting times, and we're dancing around and enjoying it. And the consequences, we do not have terrific photographs of whales and lighthouses. We managed to get to Juneau. We got everybody off the boat and to the hotel, and but then next morning it's more float plane time. This time I want to get everybody to Cape Spencer. Cape Spencer is probably the most remote lighthouse we visited. Very difficult to reach, you'll see in a minute, by water. And it also was somewhat impacted by the earthquake in 1946, which really impacted Scotch Cap Lighthouse, which is way up on the Aleutians. And 5 lighthouse people were actually killed in that tsunami. But let's get out there. Oh, this is in Juneau. We were able to find slightly larger planes. We actually could get 9 or 10 aboard one of these Beaver aircraft. This is a bunch of the good-looking people attending on the plane that I happen to be traveling with. This is Cape Spencer, and it also has been taken over and looked after by a local group, and is really in fairly good, for lighthouses up in this part of the world, it's in fairly good condition. They're doing a very good job. But this picture looks very benign. I want to give you a sense of how rough. That's where we were. It's this coast out on the outside of Alaska is absolutely wild, and I'm not sure I would have wanted to ever try and bring a boat in there, but by helicopter or doing it as we were, viewing it from the air, just great. But this is really, really wild country. From on our way back, we're flying and we're bouncing along just on the underside of the cloud, and actually we come over this one range of mountains and then you turn right to get down into Juneau. But when we were on the dock that morning, I heard several people saying that they had never seen glaciers. People from different parts of the country. I'm a former climber and very used to that kind of world, but there were several people that they'd never seen glaciers. And as we were coming along, I asked the pilot, could he, instead of turning right, play and take us up the glacier? In that, during sunny days, when it's bright sunlight, you just get the sheen, the harsh white light of the ice. But on an overcast day, as we were here, you get the lovely blues. And this unfortunately you can't. I don't know that you're going to get very much of the glacier and the blues, but this was a very exciting flight. We just followed the glacier up and up and up before turning around and heading on down. Finally, let's get my notes here. This is Eldred Rock. Eldred Rock. We took a large boat from Juneau up to Haines, and Eldred Rock is located outside Haines. We were advised it was we couldn't land. One, landing conditions are awful, very slippery rocks and seaweed, and secondly, at that point in time, the lighthouse was in very sad condition and really not safe. But we got there, gorgeous day, and I could have stopped and watched the views around Eldred Rock all day long. It was just, and it's, as was said in the introduction, this is the only of the wooden octagonal lighthouses remaining. There were, I think, 4 or 5 at one point between 1905 and 1910. But this is the only one remaining. Now, when we were there, it was in very sad condition, and it was all tied up in legal lawsuits. In that there was a local group forming that wanted to improve and repair, but when you get into fights with the Forestry Commission, the Bureau of Land Management, and everybody else, it takes years and years of legal wrangling. But I actually noticed that somebody from this part of the world is actually on the broadcast today, and they can perhaps fill us in a little bit better. But I am seeing notices now that work is starting to repair and improve it. I'd hate to see this lost. This is one of the most beautiful lighthouses we have in North America. From there, we traveled, where's my notes here? This is Cape, that's not Hinchinbrook. I now lost my notes. No. Is it Point? No, it's, this is Sentinel. This is Sentinel Island. I had to get my notes. I'd forgotten which lighthouse this was. Again, built originally in 1902, but it was one of the original wooden lighthouses and was totally replaced in 1935, automated in 1986. This is the locals. I couldn't get over the amount of seals on some of these rocks, and they're just sliding, and clearly the eating and the fishing is good in this part of the world. This is it coming into Haines. Haines is probably one of the most spectacular scenes. It's just absolutely gorgeous, and obviously with the recent snows, I could have just enjoyed that ride forever and ever. But we had to leave, and now this is Point Retreat. Let me bring you a little closer on Point Retreat. It's just it's small, but it's a delightful spot. The we spent quite a bit of time sitting in it. It was warm, a lovely afternoon. Tiny lighthouse, but well looked after. Again, a local group has taken it on, and it's being well preserved. From here, it was getting to be dinner time, but before dinner, we had to get the campfire going and get the s'mores going. Here's Dick. He was pretty good at it. A few others had burned offerings, but Dick did a good job, and here's a few of the others just getting into the s'mores before dinner. And unfortunately, at this point, we've come up from Ketchikan to Juneau, been out the coast, and have gone up to Haines. And it's the end of the journey for the main part of the tour. At the end of the tours, one of the things I love is we've encouraged, you can't take the teacher out of Darlene. She loves to help, and we always encourage her at the farewell dinner to tell us stories. And so she sets off and finds books, and part of our dinner scene is the stories. I also have silly awards for all things committed on the trip. But from here, we say goodbye to some, and we move north and take the plane to Cordova. This is Lisa giving everybody the bird. All of a sudden, these bird puppets appear, and Lisa clearly enjoyed it. But we get to Cordova, and the snows are all there, but it's absolutely spectacular. This is the most northern point of our tour, where it's latitude 60 degrees. And just Gary and Debbie just having a nice beer, and they were not the only beer. I think Gary moved around, and then there's Nina. So it was just one afternoon when we arrived, everybody having a great time in Cordova. Now in Cordova, the highlight is Cape St. Elias. And this was the lens which is now in the museum in Cordova. It's a third order lens, just very nicely done, and well preserved and well displayed in the little town. Cordova itself is a small town of about 2,000 people, but it's only accessible by air or by sea. It is not accessible by road, which is part of the story here. Now, in Juneau and Ketchikan, I was able to charter sometimes fairly large planes that would hold up to 10 people. Not so in Cordova. All we could get were these very small Cessnas. But what fun to go flying in this is probably one of the most beautiful flights I've ever taken. Sitting up there, going out to St. Elias. This is the pilot did not have to actually go up this glacier to get there, but it was just we negotiated as part of the journey to fly up the glacier, and then we would swing right over this col and out to the lighthouse. Now, you can't really see it very well here, but let me pull in. The lighthouse is tucked in down the bottom there. And this is the absolutely amazing scenery. The local group that's formed to renovate and help this has actually now built a they've renovated this lighthouse keeper's house, and you can go and stay there in the bunkhouse. I seriously considered that at one point, but then you can't land here. It's just too many rocks. But there's a sandy spot around this corner, and the thought of getting our group hiking 3 or 4 miles all the way down here to go to a bunkhouse and then probably getting stuck with the weather for a week was just not a very good idea. So we enjoyed the lighthouse. Let me pull in a little closer so you can get to see it a bit better. Here we go. But a great spot to visit. Not in the greatest condition, but again, a group has formed, a group is taking it over and starting to do the renovations and repairs that are needed. From here, we flew across to Cape Hinchinbrook. Again, this is probably the lighthouse that was in the worst condition and in the most impossible, excuse my photo being a little, not being vertical, but I think the plane was banking as I was taking shots. But Hinchinbrook is very remote, very difficult to access by water or land. Helicopter is probably about the only decent way of doing it, but in terrible shape. And I don't know of anybody looking after or trying to look after or repair this one at the time. We went for a walk. After that journey, Janet and I went for a walk, and we'd heard about this one lighthouse at the time. I'll get my notes here. This light, what I've done here. No, I've lost. Well, but we had this faux light was actually built in the 70s, and I thought it was built on a little island, and I now find that it was actually an old sunken barge. It was built on a sunken barge, but when it was built, oh, here we are. I found my notes. It was built by Bob Ardovson. Now, Bob, having built this model lighthouse, he equipped it with lights. He's got a front door light, and he's got a light in the dome. And he applied to have it as a navigational light and fought the Coast Guard for a long period of time. And today it is listed officially as a navigation light in the Cordova area. But quite amazing that it survived all these years, and it still looks pretty good. But I did not know if this was a bonus light, in that on the start of the tour, I did not know about this light, and only found out as once I got going. We were in Cordova 24 hours before the start of Copper River salmon season. Probably people don't know the name Cordova so much, but we all know about Copper River salmon. So these are all the boats the night before, getting ready to set off and to the estuary. At the start, I said we added a spare day. Well, the trouble is, we get to Cordova, we've had our day at the lighthouse, and now we have a spare day, and it's really a very small town and not a lot of things to do. And so collectively, we managed to procure the only bus in town, the town school bus and driver, to take us on the journey to nowhere. Nowhere is the place 35 miles down the road where the original Copper River mine was found. Copper River is well aptly named in that the early prospectors who went up that valley found a mountain which was worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and it was almost pure copper ore. And that is what was the founding of Cordova. But we chose to have this lady take us for the day, the 35 miles, and along the way she would stop and we would find moose, we would find beaver dams, we'd find trumpeter swans. And it was just one of these days that you couldn't plan. It just happened, and it was really so much fun. We had a great time, and this is the end of the road. The end of the road has actually been washed out. There is a bridge here, and it did originally go a few miles more. But this you can just get a sense of how the winter storms sweep through this area and just wash everything away. The original mountain was over here, now gone, and copper everywhere all over the world. Dick and Lisa and everybody getting photos. But regrettably, this brings us to the end of our tour of Alaska, and just a phenomenal time in a month when I really worried that the weather wasn't going to work. But the weather for us was amazing. And with that, Jeremy, I'm going to hand the microphone back to you, and we'll do our best to answer any questions or listen to any comments people would like to make.
That is fantastic, Chris.
Sorry?
That is great. Let's see. Can Can you get out of
Oh,
screen sharing?
yeah, get out of stop share. There we go.
Excellent. Looks like we already have a question in the chat. The question is, when will you be repeating this tour? Jeff might want to help with that one.
It certainly, the answer is from my side, not in the immediate future, in that we're obviously stuck with coronavirus at this point. But at this point in time, I was supposed to be in Sicily with a Lighthouse tour, and that's canceled. In September, we were supposed to be a Lighthouse tour to Greece, and I have a Japan Lighthouse tour all set to go. So it's a little bit further down the road, but I would be scared in that the weather was so fantastic that I would be scared to trust my luck that I would get 14 fabulous days. We only had one day where the weather went a little south on us. So, but from my perspective, it's a little way down the road.
Yeah, I've had a couple of people tell me that this tour was like one of the best experiences of their lives. Jeff, do you have anything to add about? Has there been any discussion of ever doing an Alaska tour again?
Yeah, we'll do it again, but not for a few years. It'll take a little while to put it back together.
Mm-hmm. So at this point, I'm watching for questions in the chat, and actually I do see another question in the well, actually it's the same question actually. Somebody else asking if there was
would you like to come in on this?
If there was going to be another Alaska tour.
Yeah, and if anybody doesn't actually want to go to Alaska on their own, we can provide you the itinerary, all of the GPS coordinates, all of the contacts that we made in order to access these various properties and or fly over them, as the case may be. So we're always available to provide anybody information to do a self-guided tour, even if the society doesn't do one in the near future.
Yeah. So at this point, we can start taking questions verbally. And to do that, you can use the hand raising feature, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with if you've done Zoom events before. And to do that, I might need Jeff's help with this because I can't actually see it as the host. But if you click participants,
I know.
You should be able to. I'm going to click mute all. Whoops, no, that's Chris talking. Go ahead.
Jeremy,
Chris.
I'm going to suggest it in the comments section. There is a lady, Susan York from
the Eldred
York and Eldred, and that would be very nice to hear an update as to what's happening there. And that this tour is 4 years ago, so I have to believe that a lot has gone on since, and I would love to hear an update from her if she can be.
Sure. Yeah, we can unmute Susan. She actually raised her hand, so I'm gonna unmute Susan, and she can give us an update on what's going on with Eldred Rocklight. So I'm clicking Ask to Unmute, and Susan should be able to. Wait a second. I'm sorry. Trying it again. Ask to unmute. A little tricky. There. I think you're unmuted now. Where is Susan?
I'm right here. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah. There you are. Yeah.
Hi.
So you can go ahead. Yeah. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Sue York. I actually live in Juneau, but I'm the executive director for our association, which is based out of Haines. So most of the board members are in Haines, and about 3 of us live in Juneau. We did just receive on March 1st a lease with the U.S. Coast Guard. It's a 5-year lease with a option for 3 more 5-year terms. So we basically have 20 years to start rehabilitation. But like Christopher mentioned in his tour, there was so much involvement with the Forest Service and GSA that we were unable to actually get ownership of the lighthouse because of environmental problems like diesel in the soil and all those. Everyone that's worked with lighthouses before knows all these problems with lead-based paint and asbestos, that we have to deal with when we're talking about old buildings. So what our plan is now is to start rehabilitation, but all of our work has to be approved through the Coast Guard and, of course, the State Historic Preservation Officer. And eventually, if we get all those nasty things cleaned up, then we will apply for ownership through the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act to own the lighthouse. But so we're leasing it right now. We're not owners. Coast Guard still owns it. But like Christopher mentioned, it is in sorry shape. Upper Lynn Canal is incredibly harsh weather. But because Eldred Rock, like several of the other octagonal design, it's the only remaining one from that design that wasn't rebuilt into that pyramid tower structure. It had a concrete base. And so that's what saved it. That's what's kept it from falling completely over, is that solid concrete base. So actually tomorrow we're sending up a structural engineer to make assessments of that concrete base. We're sending up abatement specialists tomorrow to the lighthouse, and they're, going to give us sampling of asbestos and all that other stuff. So we're actually getting started this summer. Of course, funding is always the challenge, fundraising, especially right now during COVID. A lot of the grants that we were hoping for from the state of Alaska are being redirected towards COVID response. So that's a little hiccup, but we're so pleased to be able to get started rehabilitating this gem. I mean, it is a beautiful spot. And it's Christopher.
What's your window to work on the lighthouse during the
Well,
year?
we have a 5-year lease. So we have 5 years of this first term.
During the year, during a normal year, how many months during the year can you actually
Right.
work?
It's just May through September up here. And the way we get there is actually our sponsor is the Marine Exchange of Alaska, based out of Juneau. It's the Marine Exchange covers the whole state of Alaska, but they take us there on their landing craft. So there's a nice little beach there at low tide, and tomorrow's a negative 3.9 foot tide. So it's a nice low tide tomorrow. That's why they're going, and the weather's cooperating. So they land with their landing craft. But as Christopher said, it's a scramble up to the lighthouse. The original boat tramways, which is the way that the Coast Guard used to access the lighthouse, are all ripped up. You can get there if you're rich by helo.
Yeah, the original tramways are actually in a restaurant in a bar in Haines. I went and had to a restaurant where they had the nice features, and they had designed and built all their own tables. And I happened to look at the rails and said, "Those look awfully like train tracks, I think." And he says, "Yes, I got them off the beach at Eldred Rock."
Eldred Rock, yeah. And thankfully
the brewery,
yeah. And and that's, you mentioned that these lighthouses are just open. I mean, people land on them and explore them all the time. And there is a bit of, graffiti and that kind of thing that happens because they're basically not watched after. And likewise, the original fourth order Fresnel lens is in the museum in Haines as well. So they did rescue the lens, at least.
Good.
Yeah. So any other questions? Does anyone have any other questions about what's going on at Eldred Rock? You can go to our website and get filled in, eldredrocklighthouse.org, and we're on Facebook too. But we're really excited to get started, and we're moving towards partnering with some of the other lighthouses, specifically Sentinel and Five Finger, to sort of have a group tour of the Alaska lighthouses in Southeast.
I think Roger has a question. Roger, you have a question for Sue, do you? I'm going to unmute you. You can go ahead.
Actually, a question for Chris.
Oh, okay.
Chris, can you put up a map of Alaska with all the houses on it?
Yeah. I have to go share my screen to do that.
I'm just going to interrupt for a second. Sue,
Okay.
I would like to get in touch with you. I would love to have you on our podcast at some point.
Oh, I'd be happy to.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, I'll put my email here on the chat.
Okay, great. I definitely would like to set that up.
Are you okay with me sharing a screen?
Message.
Are you
Sure,
okay with me sharing the screen?
sure, Chris.
Um,
Thank you, Sue. So I'm gonna, Sue, I'm muting you, but if you could put your email in the chat, that would be great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
okay. Can you see the map okay now?
Yes.
Yes.
And a question.
What is the question?
I just wanted to see the map.
Oh, you just want to, oh, I see. Well, essentially, I mean, the map, we've got the whole Gulf of Alaska, Ketchikan, the south part. There is an ice Cape Decision out here. This is Five Fingers. We were in Ketchikan. We came up, and then the boat took us in through here. There's a narrow passageway. Petersburg is the closest location to Five Fingers. We could have got boats there, but I couldn't get hotel rooms. And then we went from there to Juneau, out to Cape Spencer, and then up to Haines. Then we flew up to Cordova, and St. Elias is here. Hinchinbrook is over on this peninsula. I'll enlarge this a little bit for a second so you can see. Basically, once we're in Cordova, Cordova is here. The Copper River, the delta is huge. It just sprawls all over. So we came out of Cordova, went up over a glacier on this and this end, and then round to Elias, across to Hinchinbrook and back. I hope I'll stop sharing so we can get back to everybody in.
Okay. Roger, did you have anything to add or another question? You're all set?
Anybody who wants a copy of the map, just send me an email, jeff@uslhs.org, and I'll send you the actual map from the tour so you can refer to it later.
Somebody asked a question on why the lighthouses in Alaska are rectangular or octagonal. And I believe it's because of the year in which they were built. They were kind of Art Nouveau designs for lighthouses, but maybe Susan knows better why the lighthouses are not conformed to
Not oval.
oval or round like we expected them to be.
Sue, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Okay, there you go.
So the question was why the design?
Yes. Why are they rectangular instead of circular?
Right.
Even some lighthouses.
Well, we just finished our historic structures report, and I'm not sure I can answer why, but they chose particularly a special. That was just a popular design back in 1904 when they were hiring. They had identified like 9 spots because of several shipwrecks, one on Eldred Rock, and there was many shipwrecks going on because of the gold rush, the Klondike gold rush. And I want to say there was 5 designed that way, the octagonal design, but they were in with the keeper house in the building, not separate. And they rebuilt all of them because they didn't have the concrete base like Eldred Rock. So they rebuilt all into that Roman style tower back in 1945. I think most of them were rebuilt. But Eldred Rock was the only one not. So if you look at a lot of the historic photos of the Alaska lighthouses, you'll see the other ones that were octagonal, like Cape Decision, and like many of the ones that Christopher mentioned. If you look at the historic ones, several of those were originally octagonal as well.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes, I thought it would happen to be the time and place and the architectural design.
Yeah, it was just the fad.
Yes, the fad.
And I think it's also it's cheaper to construct a square than it is to try and have a lot of other shapes. Rectangles and squares are the least expensive way of building.
Right, with cement, yeah.
Yes.
I think the rebuilt ones are usually described as Art Deco.
Yep.
Yeah, the concrete ones.
Yeah.
So we have a question from, it says Rick and Ruth Geiger. So I'm going to click ask to unmute, and I'm not sure if it's Rick and Ruth or Rick or Ruth Geiger.
Well,
You can go
we
ahead.
both had the question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
She's Rick. She's Ruth. I'm Rick.
Okay, you can go
Anyway,
ahead.
we have friends in Kodiak Island, and we were wondering if there are any lighthouses over there. They've invited us to come up, but we've never gotten up to Alaska yet. We're in Southern California.
I don't know that I could. I know that in planning this tour, I looked at every possible light in Alaska, and there may be some beacons, but I don't think there's anything of substance in Kodiak. But I'm speaking from memory. You could look it up on eBiblio on the internet, Lighthouses of Alaska, under eBiblio, and you will be able to look at that location to see if there's anything, but my memory says probably not.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
Sue is shaking her head no. I don't think there's any lighthouses around there. The answer is no, right, Sue?
The little faux lighthouse I showed you, and part of the publicity they put out about that's the lighthouse that's the farthest north in Alaska. Maybe not quite accurate, but part of
Okay,
their signage.
Right.
thank you very much.
Okay. Anne from the Chesapeake chapter of the USLHS has a question, and let's see here. They changed the controls a little bit, so it's a little tricky, but Anne, you can go ahead.
It's not so much a question as I was on this trip, and I got to say it was definitely one of the best trips I have ever been on in my life. It was special in so many ways, and I think one of the ways was because you had those 3 days set aside. Like in places like Ketchikan, we would go around and we would go into a local store, and they got to know us. We'd walk into a store and they'd say, "Are you the Lighthouse folks?" And we'd have a conversation and we get to know them, and it was like we weren't the people coming off the cruise ship for an hour and then leaving.
Yeah.
So it was special in that way, and then just it was just so different, and getting to know the other people on the trip, and then doing that extension. So it's there's definitely I know it's harder to do the smaller trips, but they're also special because you do get to know people, and if they're a slower pace, you also get to interact more with local people and know a little bit more about the history of the place.
I think the way this tour was timed, before all of the normal cruise ship tourism started happening, you got even more chance to interact with the locals, which was good.
Yeah, and we got the benefit of doing the jumping off just before that started, so people were ready. So we got to take advantage of that. I also want to ask, for Eldridge Rock, we worked on Thomas Point, and we had volunteers get certified in lead paint abatement. So we could do that ourselves. We saved a lot of money that way. I don't know if that's possible in Alaska, but have you considered that?
Right. Yeah, we have considered that. The certification, though, for us, you have to go to Seattle or Anchorage, and that ups the cost considerably.
Okay. For us, it was up in Baltimore. And that's a lot less.
Yeah, we deal with remote issues up here.
We had to pay the fee, but that was
Right.
yeah. Okay.
But thank you for the suggestion.
I see that Darlene Chisholm has a question in the chat room. She's saying that, Darlene, did you want to ask it in the chat, or do you want to want me to unmute you? I can
Unmute.
I'll unmute.
Unmute.
Okay. Okay, Darlene, you are unmuted. You can
I want
there
to
you go.
ask Susan. Okay. I was in Washington, D.C. at the Coast Guard Historian's office working on a project, and some people came in from Eldridge Rock, and we ran off some copies of stuff from them. They were trying to figure out how the dock was all set up. Have you got the dock plan set up? Can you hear me?
Well, tomorrow, that structural engineer that's going up to the rock It is also going to investigate marine landing options. But the issue with Eldridge Rock is just the high winds and the considerable tide. We have about a 20-foot tide range. And so anything a marine landing there is extremely difficult. But actually Eldridge Rock, in comparison to Sentinel and Five Finger, is actually one of the better approaches. I mean, it's just in a bad weather area, but there's actually some good landing areas with landing craft, if you can get your hands on a landing craft. But no, we are considering looking at installing, but that of course you're going to have to drive pilings down, which you have to get permission from this agency and that agency and the other. And it took us almost 14 years to get this lease. So we're working, we're trying. But yeah, marine landing is one of our most important issues, because you can't have visitors unless they can safely get on and off the island. Yeah, we're looking into that, but it's going to have to be a doozy of a dock, because it's a very remote, extreme condition. Definitely go to our website and check out some of the pictures of Eldridge Rock. It's like Christopher's tour. It's a small island right in the middle of Lynn Canal. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about having the cruise ships, have a tour over to Eldridge Rock or something like that, and trying to set that all up.
Yeah.
But it was a dream, and that's been quite a while ago.
Oh, it's
I gotta
always been a dream. Of course, now the cruise ship industry is going down the tubes this summer. But the better way, if anyone considers another tour of lighthouses up here, the better way is small chartered, like Fjord Lines out of Haines is a good one. I mean, there's a lot of small charter companies, tour companies that can take you right onto the island, and you can either kayak on or, be escorted, in other words. But yeah, the cruise ship industry is definitely where the money is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. I got to add something else. The day we were on this cruise, and the day that we went from Juneau to Haines, was so perfect, with the snow on the mountains and the whales and the birds and the lighthouses and everything. Thomas outdid himself. He took 5 pictures.
We paid extra to have the whales arrive.
1,995.
1,995 pictures in one day.
Yeah, we're having a little trouble with the sound, but we certainly got the gist of what you're saying, Darlene. Thank you. All set, Darlene. Thank you so much for both of you. It's always great to see you. Yeah. Thank you. Let's see. I've got a couple. Go ahead. Go ahead.
One of the reasons why this tour was successful is because we were able to take a large number of people who are able to share in these costs. It's not inexpensive to charter planes and to charter boats and to do all this type of thing. Yeah. And so doing a tour with, say 5 or 6 people, ultimately it's going to be more expensive. So we try to do it as a large group to try to save a little money when we can, because there's power in numbers as far as the dollar goes. Yeah.
We got a couple of things in the chat room I want to pass along. One is Peter Kaufman, who he emailed me about this earlier, and he is working on a book on the 1946 Scotch Cap tsunami that killed the 5-man crew at the Scotch Cap Lighthouse. And he says if anyone has any interest in that, he can email them. So Peter, maybe you can message me in the chat room. I don't know how you want to handle that, if you want to give your email address in the chat room, or just tell people they can privately message you in the chat room if they want more information. Just let me know how you want to handle that. But that sounds really, really interesting. I'm very happy to know that you're working on a book on that. It's one of the most famous lighthouse tragedies in American history. So thank you very much for letting us know about that. Thank you, Peter. And I just got a message. Let me see. Let's see. I don't see. I'll follow up on that yet. And Marie asks, will there be a link to a recording of this later? The answer is yes. This this event will be posted online on YouTube and on the USLHS website within a couple of days. So watch for that. You can relive the event, watch it again, and people who missed it can watch it online.
We'll send all the society members a link, including all of you, so you'd be able to have access to the direct link to it.
Somebody asked, Mary Enright asked, Susan, could you, maybe you saw that, Susan, so could you share some of the names of smaller chartered carriers or a website?
I did see that. I put on the main tour company out of Haines that does a shuttle from Haines to Skagway, Haines to Juneau, and passes right by the lighthouse. They don't go on the island, but they go to the lighthouse with their tour. Also, I'd like to mention Captain Ed Page is on the chat. I think he's a participant in the Zoom meeting, and that he's the executive director of the Marine Exchange of Alaska, and they have equipment on almost all of the lighthouses in Southeast Alaska, and he's been to every lighthouse in Southeast Alaska. He's very experienced. So he did have a comment. If you could unmute Ed Page, he can give his input on what the Marine Exchange is doing at the lighthouses. He didn't raise his hand, but his name is Ed Page.
Okay, Ed has been unmuted. If Ed would like to say
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Well,
yes.
me and my colleague sitting next to me, actually between the two of us, we have probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 70 years of Coast Guard experience over the years. And I'm a retired captain and served, I've got 30 years up in Alaska, but we built the maritime safety net in Alaska of 130 vessel tracking stations and another 55 weather stations. But one of the things I've been trying to do is support the lighthouses in Alaska, which near and dear to my heart, obviously being prior Coast Guard. And so we do contribute to like Five Finger Lighthouse. We provide logistics support as well as Cape Decision Lighthouse, logistics support and some funding support to those organizations. And we install weather stations and vessel tracking stations. And even the one, I might add, at Cape Decision here this last spring, if you think back, the Lighthouse used to have people on board that would spot marine casualties and use radios, whatever. Of course, they all left, but we now do that virtually. And so a vessel called, a fishing vessel in the middle of the night in a storm called Mayday to the Coast Guard. And unfortunately didn't give a position. And the Coast Guard captain in the port told us later on that they had a search area that, based on their radio system and electronics, it indicated they had like a 3,500 square mile search area to find this vessel that called for Mayday. Then they looked at the AIS system that was on Cape Decision, and it showed exactly the vessel, exactly where it was. They sent the helicopter there and took 5 people that were in survival suits and picked them up and saved them in the middle of the night in a storm. So the lighthouses can still be contributing to maritime safety by providing weather information and also tracking system where they are tracking vessels with this automatic identification system we've installed, and that's what the Coast Guard uses to aid search and rescue. And we can also transmit information from Lighthouse now using this new technology. So what's exciting to me is that we're kind of establishing some of the capabilities that Lighthouse has had in the past as far as providing weather reports and notifying mariners of distress situations, listening for vessels in distress, and et cetera. We're doing it through technology. But we're also trying to help keep these lighthouses, which people are enamored with, such yourselves, enamored with, and myself included. And so we've been helping to rebuild these sites and provide financial support, logistics support, and for that matter, our boat today is underway and Levels Rock's about 45 miles from our office, and some of our crew there today fixing the vessel tracking system and weather station. And tomorrow we're going up to support Sue York and the engineers that do some rehab work on her. And so we spent a lot of time running back and forth to Levels Rock, delivering supplies and people and working on it. It's the most, to me, I've won all lighthouses. It's the most impressive lighthouse in Alaska. The fact that it's the shape of it's different, unique, and it's the original lighthouse. And it's an incredible location. Some of you have seen right there in the mountains, et cetera. And we've had some phenomenal trips with whales, et cetera, while we're there at the lighthouse. And so And I hope many of you can see it in the future. Our goal is to make it as available as many people as possible. And Sue had mentioned it's a great landing beach. We land all the time, and you don't even have to get your feet wet. And we bring our dogs with us, and we all go ashore and work on the lighthouse. So it's a pretty unique place, and we're pleased to be part of that and contribute to that lighthouse and the other lighthouses. We're at Mary Island, Tree Point, Point Retreat, Elder Rock, obviously, and many other lighthouses in Alaska. Even Cape St. Elias, we fly out there by helicopter and install our equipment out on Cape St. Elias. So anyway, that's enough said, but I think it's great what you folks are doing, and I'm glad to be part of it. And I'm out. I'll drop the mic there.
Well, that's great, Ed. Thank you for all that great information. Thank you for what you're doing. I think Rick and Ruth, did you have another question? Your hand is up. There you go. Ask to unmute. I think you have to unmute yourself.
There you go.
You're
Okay.
unmuted. There you go.
Yeah, I think we're okay, but this looks wonderful, and we hope that someday we can join.
Oh, I do have a question though. In the magazines that we get, and also from experience, like we said that we live right on the coast in California, that in fact we toured a lighthouse that actually is built on the Andreas Fault, San Andreas Fault. So it was a little scary. And I had an experience there because it's extremely windy. Is I had a hat on it. I think it's
Probably a lighthouse.
a lighthouse hat, and it blew off my head, went around and came back again. Now, I was wondering if maybe the lighthouse was possessed, or
It's a magical power.
yeah. So anyway, and we lived in back east. We lived on an island, Martha's Vineyard Island, and
They have 4 lighthouses.
they have 4 lighthouses. And one of them, they call it Gay Head. There's a more proper name for it, but that's where the Gay Head Indians were. So, and then they built a lighthouse because it's got a beautiful bit of land where you can go around and see all the different colors of clay and whatever. Unfortunately, they had to move that lighthouse several times, and yeah, because the island is one side's building up and the other side is losing land. So if you're a land investor, you have to make sure you go on the right side because your land is disappearing. But in any case, I just wanted to share that, and we really enjoyed this program.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let's see. I think we have to wrap it up in about 6 or 7 minutes. We planned on 90 minutes for this event. And Anne, I think you have another question. Let me unmute you. Oops. Sometimes it doesn't respond to the clicks right away.
I didn't have another question. I'm not sure where that came from.
It looked like your hand was up. No? It showed a raised.
It was unintended. I see it too. It's unintentional.
Okay.
Thank you, though. This was great. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, thanks, Ann. Nice to see you.
Can I add just a comment a second?
Sure, Chris.
There are 150, 200 people here, but I see one young lady here that I want to give special thanks to, and that's Mary and Phil. You get these wonderful books and maps and badges, and the lady who does all of this is Mary. And if you see the tours and all the work that's gone into this, I just would like to acknowledge the terrific help that I get from Mary in putting these things together.
Thank you,
That's
Mary.
Mary Borkowski we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Can I, should I unmute Mary and Phil?
Unmute Mary. Unmute Mary. There you go.
They're unmuted.
Are we unmuted now?
Yeah, they're unmuted.
Hi, Mary and Phil.
You're very welcome, Chris.
Well, it's always so much fun and so easy.
Thank you, guys. Okay, Jeff and Augie, you have anything to add?
No.
Everybody, in case you don't know, that's the famous Augie. And you can, those of you who are really true Lighthouse buffs don't need to do much thinking to figure out who Augie is named after. Well, thank you all so much for taking part in our second Lighthouse Tour retrospective, and we do plan to do more. So watch your emails for invitations for further Lighthouse tours. And Chris, it's always such a great pleasure. This was fantastic.
Well, the next one is going to go to the Baltic.
Wow, I can't wait.
Finland, Latvia, Estonia, and Russia.
Wow. So I don't feel the need to actually go to these places now that, you know, yeah, we have you.
Oh, you do.
Yeah, you're right. I do, but this is the next best thing. So thank you all so much. Stay well, stay happy, stay safe. Thank you so much, everybody, and take care.
Bye-bye.